We live in the real world, right? So, why do we sit there and why do we study literature? Well, the thing is, we have a lot of questions, right? Let's pretend this little stick figure is us, right? And we're constantly filled with questions. We have questions about, our identity. We have questions about who we are. We have questions about what it means to be human. We have questions about, the others in our life. We worry about our families. We think about our friends. We worry about the relationships we have with these people and relationships we have with people we don't even know, right? Like, how do we relate to other people? We also have questions about the world in which we live. We worry about our society, we think about our culture, we think about nature, and we ask ourselves, like, what does that all mean, and how are we supposed to exist in these different types of environments? How do we exist in this matrix? And then, after all those questions, we also have questions about, like, the ideas that are running around in our heads. We have questions about what is love, what is hate, what is family. We think about these ideas, and we want to know what they really mean, because a lot of questions that we have and that we ask ourselves, there really aren't any answers to. At least none to be found in math or science, because it's about how we experience the world, right? So basically, we can take all these questions that have no definitive answers, and we could put them in categories, right? There's questions about the self or human nature. We have questions about others or relationships that we have with others. We have questions about society. We have questions about nature, at least in terms of how people relate to that, right? And we also have questions about ideas, right? Now, these are all questions that we all ask at some point in our life. And we, are often like burdened with having to figure this out, without the benefit of ever knowing whether or not what we believe or our perspective is accurate or not, right? So we have all these questions, and and they're constantly running around in our heads, and we usually end up just trying to make the best of it and coming up with answers, and sometimes they contradict. So we wonder, what does it all mean, and where can we get answers? Sometimes we turn to entertainment, sometimes we turn to our parents, sometimes we turn to religion, right? But there is one place that we do study, right? That where we can try to get answers, right? We can look at philosophy, we can look at art, and we can look at science. In this class, we're going to focus primarily on what art has to offer, right? The arts being the humanities, things like literature, history, sociology, anthropology, that kind of stuff, right? And it's this idea that literature, anything that we read, is kind of, like a petri dish. It's like a microcosm of a universe where we can run experiments. There's simulations inside the mind of an author or a writer or a poet or a playwright, but they're not as objective as a scientific experiment, but they're definitely a perspective on how the real world works, right? So literature allows us to make hypotheses about abstract ideas, about the self or human nature, about others and human relationships, and about the matrix, which is just a fancy word for a setting, right? The society and nature as we experience it, right? And when we look at all these together, it kind of makes this nice, neat little acronym to help us remember it. It's like a different spelling of awesome, right? So that's one way that you can remember the kinds of things you should be asking yourself as you're reading literature, right? So as you read, you have to ask, what answers is this book or this story or this essay or this speech trying to provide about ideas, the self relationship, and the matrix? And when you ask yourself these questions, these are the kinds of questions you ask in order to get to a theme or a moral, right? Because we experience the world in all those areas. We have experiences with ideas, we have experiences with ourselves, we have experiences with others, and we have experiences in our setting. And all literature ever tries to do is give you a perspective on what all that means, how they fit together, and some ideas on how they work. So ultimately, every time you read, at least in my class, we're going to be looking for these things. We're going to be looking for the hypothesis that the author is giving us about any one of those ideas. Maybe it'll just inspire you to come up with your own. All right. So if you have questions about the 4 areas of life where themes and morals come from, please ask. And remember, stay awesome.